This episode is made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to the Film Podcast, where we read the book
and then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we discuss JRR Tolkien's 1954 novel, The Two Towers. Welcome back to Middle-earth. Unfortunately, Boromir's corpse is at our feet. Otherwise, this would just be a really happy return to Middle-earth.
Well, it's funny, like, even though we started with this kind of shocking, violent moment and sad at that, it's going back to Middle-earth is it is still a warm feeling to me, and it's familiar. And yeah. No matter what's going on in the world, I'm always happy to go back to Middle-earth.
So I think this is the book where I kind of DNF'd, I kind of didn't finish this book, I think, when I went to read it a few years ago for the first time. And like I said, I detailed our history. We detailed our history of Lord of the Rings in our previous episodes on Fellowship. But yeah, I think I fell off in this book somewhere towards the middle and didn't finish it. And then I've never read Return of the King. So I'm definitely eager to get to that. But I was thinking about why as I was reading this, and I really believe it's because this part of the book, we get no hobbits. Well, that's not true. We get no Frodo, I should say. We get Merry and Pippin, obviously. Frodo's gone. And Frodo's our main protagonist who we've followed throughout all of Fellowship. And to have him just be gone for this opening part of this book is weird. It feels weird to me. And so when you're talking about that homey, warm feeling, I think part of that's tied up with these hobbits for me. And so I get a little bit of it in the Merry Pippin chapters, but when we're just with Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas, it just feels like a very different book.
I think that's what it is. I think the second book switches gears into a different kind of story. I think the first one was the leaving of that warm territory into this more unknown area. And now we're in this, it reads like a war novel as well. Battle plans and alliances and people's, allegiances and where they lie. The beginning of this book is very much that. I think that the best way to consume this material is just as soon as you finish Fellowship, start reading Two Towers. The gap that we've taken has really, I think, changed kind of how our outlook on this scene would have been right after. Since we last covered Fellowship of the Ring, I've had to try so hard to not encounter Two Towers in any way. I was actually at a brewery recently, and they were playing Two Towers, and I had to avert my eyes the entire time because I was I knew we were going to cover it for the podcast.
Yeah, I've also been avoiding it. I think it's come on a couple times on TV and stuff, and I've just had to walk to the other room. But hey, we're here now. It's actually been almost a year, to the week. I think it's been a couple weeks, I think, difference, but it's been almost exactly a year since we covered Fellowship. And if anybody wants to go back and check those out, in case you're just finding this, it's episodes 36 through 39. We did 3 on the book, and then we covered the movie. So this is a continuation of that coverage, I guess, in that way. And this is, other than, I guess, Harry Potter, where we returned, this is one of our few times where we've returned to the same material like this.
Yeah, I think so.
To the same series, I guess I'm saying.
Right, so far.
So far, but we'll probably be doing more of this in the future. So yeah, I guess, do you want to start off with general thoughts or get into some summary? I do have some interesting notes from the Wikipedia about the title, The Two Towers.
Okay, let's hear that first.
Okay, so according to Wikipedia, Tolkien wrote, "The Two Towers gets as near as possible to finding a title to cover the widely divergent books 3 and 4 and can be left ambiguous." I guess meaning what the Two Towers refer to. At this stage, he planned to title the individual books. The proposed title for Book 3 was The Treason of Isengard. Book 4 was titled The Journey of the Ring-Bearers, or The Ring Goes East. The titles The Treason of Isengard and The Ring Goes East were used in the Millennium edition of the books. So I guess he's talking, how it says Book 3, Book 4 as you're getting into this book, right. And it's actually two separate books. That's what that's referring to. So in letters to Rainer Unwin, Tolkien considered naming the two towers as Orthanc and Barad-dûr, Minas Tirith and Barad-dûr, or Orthanc and the Tower of Cirith Ungol. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing these wrong. I'm actually really bad at pronouncing Lord of the Rings names. However, a month later, he wrote a note published at the end of Fellowship of the Ring, and later drew a cover illustration, both of which identified the pair as Minas Morgul and Orthanc. In the illustration, Orthanc is shown as a black tower, three-horned, with the sign of the white hand beside it. Minas Morgul is a white tower with a thin, waning moon above it, in reference to its original name, Minas Ithil, the Tower of the Rising Moon. Between the two towers, a Nazgul flies. So there you go.
Wow.
Those are the two towers, I guess.
Love that stuff.
But I think it's also kind of ambiguous what could be the two towers, right?
Yeah, I think it's really cool to know that. I'm assuming that the books came out, book one, and then you got like half of Fellowship, and then you had to wait for the second half of Fellowship, and then book three would have been the first part of Two Towers. And I can't even imagine experiencing the stories in that way, like not knowing what comes halfway through Fellowship, not knowing what comes next. Was it ever released that way?
I don't think so. I think it was released the way we read it now, as in 3 volumes. I think it was planned to be released in different ways. I've read some conflicting things about maybe it was planned to be released as a single volume or in 2 volumes. So this is what I found. The work was initially intended by Tolkien to be 1 volume of a 2-volume set, the other to be the Silmarillion. But this idea was dismissed by his publisher. For economic reasons, The Lord of the Rings was published in 3 volumes over the course of a year, from the 29th of July, 1954, to the 20th of October, 1955. The 3 volumes were titled, as we know them. Structurally, the novel is divided internally into 6 books, 2 per volume, with several appendices of background material included at the end. Some editions combine the entire work into a single volume. So yeah, it's kind of complicated, but basically it is what it is now.
So it was never published in any sort of split way like that, like I was talking about. But that would be a weird way to experience it, regardless.
It would be weird, yeah.
So starting the story here, I know we're going to get to the plot here in a second, but just in general sense, I don't think that I was emotionally ready to jump right back into Boromir. Like I had, my memory of the story usually goes along with the movie, so jumping right into the beginning of the second book and having that scene go down the way it does, I was like, whoa. And it took me a second, but eventually I clicked in. And I think it's an effective way to get people interested, but I also think that I prefer the end of Fellowship.
I agree. I think Peter Jackson rightfully identified this as a moment of high drama, and it deserved to be the final thing in Fellowship. And it does feel weird having it start off Two Towers. It seems to me like Tolkien resisted making it overly sad, but probably because he knew that starting a book that way is going to be kind of weird. Whereas like you're free to do that if it's the climax of the novel. And so even though there is definitely some poignant moments, there's definitely some poignant details, we don't get the like I would have followed you, my king, like the awesome lines that we get in the movies.
I think it's there. Like, I think what
It's
they're
implied.
saying to each other in the movie, exactly, it's implied. I think that you can infer that that's the way that Aragorn feels in the situation.
Yeah, but Boromir doesn't say it, and I think
Right.
the impact of actually hearing those lines is really powerful. And we got to give credit, because I feel like something about like the legacy of the Lord of the Rings because of the Hobbit movies. Sometimes I worry that the legacy of the original films has kind of been tarnished by that.
I hope not, man.
Much like how the sequels of the Matrix kind of inform the original. And so I just want to definitely give Peter Jackson and his crew and his writers and whoever else consulted credit for when I feel like they did really nail something in this adaptation. And I think they really nailed the Boromir scene and put it in the right spot in the story.
The idea that a sequel could ruin, or a prequel in the Hobbit's case, could ruin any sort of... I just have never really subscribed to that. Like, it doesn't... The Matrix is still amazing on its own, regardless of the sequels. I agree with you. I think that it's like if anyone thinks poorly of The Lord of the Rings, they just... All you need to do is revisit those 3 movies and you'll be blown away again.
Right. There's also another just kind of story thing here that I feel like we have to talk about right off the bat, is that this whole part of the Two Towers is about, we already mentioned it earlier, but it's about, the 3 hunters, and then it's about Merry and Pippin. And that's it. We get no Frodo, no Sam, and no Gollum. And that is hard to do. Like, to just take your main character and push him aside for like half of the entire book. I know a lot of people struggled with this in, book 4 of A Song of Ice and Fire, when Martin did something similar. It's tough to do, where all of a sudden, like, the characters that you thought you were going to get when you picked up the novel aren't there. Now, we do get them in the latter half at least. But I think Peter Jackson was smart to integrate those two stories and not try and do this whole, like, we're going to show you everything that happens here and then show you everything that happens there.
Yeah, it's definitely very different. Yeah, having Frodo, their journeys kind of mirror each other. I mean, with what's looming for next week, I think I'll leave it at that for now. Just knowing, like, that he's setting up this whole war and these battles that are going to happen, while, you know, the innocence of the hobbits are fairly far away, or at least Sam and Frodo.
Yeah,
are far from our minds.
So speaking of the two books, we had a discussion about this, and it would have probably made more sense to cover book 3 as an episode, book 4 as an episode. But we both decided we wanted to spend a little more time in the world and give it 3 full Ink to Film episodes. So because of that, we just kind of divided it by page number. And we said, this is 1/3 of the book, this is 1/3 of the 1/3 of the book. So this episode is going to cover chapters 1 through 6, which ended up leading up right to the beginning of the Helm's Deep confrontation. So I think it ended up being a decent place to stop. A lot of this stuff feels kind of like it's building towards something. So I guess it makes it a good opening episode in that regard too. It's kind of like setting the scene for, like, the real business of Two Towers to go down.
That's exactly how I felt this week, reading and where we stopped. I was like, ooh, this is a good little teaser, get back into the groove of things. And
yeah,
I'm excited. I can't wait to continue on. But I think there is a lot to talk about in here. I think another reason why it's so, I'm always excited to jump into Tolkien, because although these heavier topics are going on, just the fact that, like, all of the characters are singing, like, 20 pages into this book. And, like, I know they're singing somber songs, but there's something about characters breaking into song in a like a fantasy story like this that like, makes me feel like
oral history, oral storytelling.
Yeah, something like there's something magical to being able to write a song like that. I felt like that sort of writing is I don't think a lot of people could pull it off, because it would be so jarring. And I think that he pulls it off, and it all makes sense. Like, I buy that the characters would do it.
So every one of those songs can almost be viewed as kind of like a poem in and of itself. So it's almost like separate works within a work, which is always cool. And because of that, you get the implication that these songs often, at least, exist within the texture of the world. They're like singing a song that has been sung before. Now, sometimes it does,
or just like freestyling them.
They're just kind of like improvising their songs or freestyling, as you said. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey man, there's some mad rap game in Middle Earth.
And, like, I get, like, some people hate this stuff, you know? Like, some people go to read the book and they're like, why am I going to read 5 pages of a song? Like, so like, I understand, especially modern readers. Some people can struggle to get into this book. And like I said before, I fell out of it the one time I tried to read it. Now, I had already seen the movie, so I kind of, like, knew what was coming. And so I kind of ended up bouncing out of it. But I think it was like some of the Treebeard stuff and the pursuit. I think for me, it felt a little bit like it was dragging, and I really just wanted something to happen. So I don't know. I'll be interested to see once I push through that and like into next week, to see if, like, I feel like it really pays off and it's worth the slower pace. Yeah,
I guess to just finish off what I was trying to say there, what I couldn't pull out of my head before was, I just think there's something magical about these songs. When I read them, to me, it shouldn't be enthralling, like you're saying. Like, I feel like it should be kind of jarring and weird, but to me, when I'm reading them, like you said, it's like poetry, and it is very engaging for me. To ask you a question though, you said that you stopped before. Do you know if you've ever read Helm's Deep? Have you read the Battle of Helm's Deep, or did you stop before that?
I was trying to remember, honestly. I feel like I haven't, but it's definitely possible that I'll start reading that chapter and then I'll go, oh yeah, I've read this before. But I think right now it feels like I actually got a little bit farther with this read than I had gotten previously.
Cool.
All right, so we better get into the summary here. We're going to go chapter by chapter. I'm just going to kind of give some bullet points, and then we can kind of react as we go, and we'll move through this material. So chapter 1 is called The Departure of Boromir. Aragorn is looking for Frodo when he hears the horn of Boromir, and he sees orcs in the woods. He battles his way to Boromir, and he finds that he has been shot with arrows, but around him lays 20 dead orcs. The hobbits have been taken. Boromir bids Aragorn to go to Minas Tirith and basically claim his birthright. Boromir also admits that he tried to take the ring and apologizes for doing it. Yeah, we talked about this scene earlier. It's still poignant here for me, but it just didn't hit me the same way that it did in the movie.
Right. Do you think you're bringing some of the emotion from the movie into the book as well? Because I feel myself doing that. Yeah. But we already talked about the scene, so let's move on. So Gimli and Legolas join Aragorn, and they decide that they're going to send Boromir off in a boat with his weapon and the weapons of his foes piled at his feet, which I thought was pretty cool. Like, that was something that I feel like wasn't in the movie. At least I don't remember it. Aragorn is able to deduce from the tracks and from the weaponry and the corpses that these orcs and goblins and stuff came from different areas. He sees that there are white hands, and then there's like a red eye symbol on some of them. Mm-hmm. And he deduces that one is Saruman and one is from Mordor, one group. And then they send up Boromir off in his funeral boat. And I do like there's like a little bit of like legend thrown in there about how like he was seen drifting through the oceans later and stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We get 3 separate songs as they eulogize Boromir. So I said, once again, this is a tradition that Tolkien loves, right? He loves these songs. They also then are trying to figure out where the hobbits have gone, and they deduce that Frodo fled for some reason, but Aragorn keeps Boromir's secret. He does not tell Legolas and Gimli that Boromir tried to take the ring. And then they find some orc tracks and decide they're going to follow, and it's kind of an epic, like, we're going to have an awesome chase. And like, it's funny because it's like that in the movie, but it's also like that in the book. Like they decide they're going to give a hell of a chase, and then they just like zip off.
There's a moment where it's said that Aragorn like I don't know, jumps like a deer or something like that into the forest, like down the path. And I envision Viggo jumping, like that actually happens at the end of Fellowship. And that brings me to just the fact that this is the end of Fellowship, the film. So like this is the exact start of Two Towers if we're trying to line it up to the movie.
Later, we do get the writers of Rohan saying like, you went how far and how many days? And then they're like, holy shit. So yeah, it just adds the fact that they're like racing after the hobbits. But it's funny because they can't actually catch up because the orcs are just going even faster.
Right. With this being the actual fully broken Fellowship at the beginning of... What do you think the difference is for you with the Fellowship being broken at the end of Fellowship of the Ring, the film, and then the Fellowship being broken at the beginning of Two Towers?
There is a sense of loss, I think, here. Knowing that all of these companions have broken and gone essentially 3 different directions. 4 if you count over the river, over the waterfall.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it's sad. It's like this companions, this fellowship of friends. They break up here, and they're all kind of doing their own thing, and it's sad because that goes against what we want in our heart of hearts, right? Like we wanted to see them go all the way with Frodo, but I think the story is the better for it eventually, right? So I think there is sort of an adjustment period though, where you're no longer reading this narrative you've come to love and appreciate of the Fellowship, and it's now gone.
And I wonder if there's something to be said for that with Tolkien finishing the book where it does. Is it to keep that Fellowship pure all the way through the Fellowship of the Ring, and then break it at the beginning of Two Towers in order to kind of show how different this story will be from the last?
Yeah. All right. Chapter 2 is called The Riders of Rohan. So our 3 hunters are tracking the orcs, and they find the brooch that one of the hobbits dropped, and we get the line, "Not idly do the leaves of Lorien fall," which is a cool line directly from the movie as well, or directly reproduced in the movie. They only sleep briefly. They're running all day. Legolas isn't perhaps sleeping at all because he's an elf. They do eventually start to tire in their pursuit, and it eventually leads them to Fanghorn Forest. And when they get to like the edge of Fanghorn Forest, they also see this fast-moving blur Legolas is able to use his elven eyesight to determine that it's 105 riders, which he counts, and then he can also like describe the exact way that the leader looks. They sort of hide, but then they're able to, like, Aragorn just shouts out at them at one point. The riders circle back around, and we meet Éomer. He wants to fight immediately. Gimli's being all prickly. It almost comes to blows, but Aragorn is able to sort of diffuse everything. And they ask for help in pursuing this orc host who they've been chasing. And Éomer reveals that actually they already slew all the orcs. And when they killed them, they didn't see any hobbits there. So the hobbits have disappeared, and it's a complete mystery as to where they have gone. Aragorn next tells Éomer of the Gandalf's fall into darkness. They mentioned that the great horse Shadowfax had returned, so they had suspicions that something maybe had befallen Gandalf. They also tell of Boromir, and it seems like a lot of bad stuff. He says like we bring all you only bring woe with you, I think is said, because it's like all the things that Aragorn has to say are all bad. They talk about Saruman and how he's treasonous. We hear about Theoden, and it seems like maybe some weirdness is going on with Theoden. So Éomer decides he's going to allow them to go, but they must promise to come before Theoden after they leave the forest, because they want to go into the forest and search for the hobbits. And he says, like, this could be my death, just allowing you to do this, but I'm going to allow it. And then they part ways. The three go into Fanghorn and are immediately kind of frightened of it because they've heard a lot of tales about Fanghorn being dangerous. And Gimli spots this old bent man in a white cloak who then disappears after they see him, and then they think, oh, that must have been Saruman, because they can't find any tracks. And then their horses are gone, and that's where we end chapter 2. So yeah, what was your take on all of this, I guess?
Well, I wanted to shoot back to the men, the Rohan men, for a second, just because I think that this is our first real look at men within Middle Earth, right? Is there much men?
Well, there was some in Bree, right?
Oh, true. Yeah, that's true. But in terms of like an organized army, and I think that folding in into this fantastical world, folding in the more grounded human men, it makes everything else seem that much more magical. And that's something that I think we notice with how they, if Gandalf is talked about, or elves in the forest, or Lothlorien, or any of those areas, they're like, oh, these are places of legend. There are actually people there, and I can't believe that these things are actually true. The fact that Aragorn is wielding Anduril is like a big deal for them, because they're like, oh, this is like a sort of legend that's actually being seen. You know what I mean? Like all these things seem like they're myths at this point to them. Yeah,
which I think is one of the reasons why Éomer is willing to kind of trust them and let them do their thing, right? Because it's like these guys are on some next level shit, like that we didn't know about.
Not to mention the fact that they're like the fastest men they've ever seen. They're like, I can't believe how quickly you got 15 miles or whatever it was.
So what about the creepy old white cloaked motherfucker who's sneaking around the outside of the camp? What's that about?
Yeah, even this time I had forgotten that this is supposed to be Saruman. I thought that this was Gandalf, and I was like, that's weird for him to be lurking.
Me too, man. I was like, oh, okay, this is actually Gandalf, and then he just didn't come forward because for whatever reason, I don't know, he's being weird. But yeah, I mean, spoiler for the next sections we're gonna get, but like Gandalf says that wasn't him later. So then it is Saruman who's just like projecting himself, or maybe actually there. Like, how is this working, and why?
It would be so weird if he was randomly there. There's no reason for him to be there. And if he was there, why didn't he just like kill someone? Why didn't he
send somebody at them? Who? Yeah, I don't know. I'll be interested to see if this comes back at some point later in the book, but I feel like it's not going to.
Very interesting.
Yeah, because I definitely thought, I was like, oh, there's Gandalf being a creep. Because Gandalf not coming forward, I feel like makes even less sense. Like, why wouldn't he come forward? I don't know.
Well, I could see Gandalf in his own way of his all-knowing way of being like, well, I need to take care of whatever's going on with like the Ents, and like I need to know what Merry and Pippin are up to, and then come back and I'll meet up with them in a little bit. I could see something like that, but it's weird that Saruman is just lurking in the woods. It seems like it's kind of, maybe it's like a projection, or maybe it's some sort of trick or something. it just, or also just in terms of like a narrative reason, maybe it's Tolkien's way of setting up the fact that Gandalf will reveal himself as Gandalf the White, and maybe, I don't know, maybe that's something to do with like, oh, we saw someone in white, so we should be afraid of them.
Yeah, it could almost, it actually almost kind of makes Gandalf feel kind of like he's maybe withholding something. I don't know, it's weird, because like at first I felt like they're going to go this route where Gandalf is almost a new person now, and he says like, oh, that's who I used to be called. We're getting ahead of ourselves. But this little bit about him like creeping around the edge of camp, I thought was like further adding to the mystique of like, can we really trust Gandalf now? But I don't feel like that's really pursued. Like he's just Gandalf. Like he's the white now, so maybe he's like more pure in some ways, but he is just Gandalf.
I've always felt a certain way about the fact that he's like supposedly seemingly a different person, but ultimately the same guy in every way, other than the fact that he's been through thousands of years worth of experiences or whatever, but he comes back and he's the same guy, and he's like, I'm a different person, but he's never in any sort of acting, in any sense does he seem like a different person other than what he says.
All right, so let's get into chapter 3, which is called the Uruk-hai. And I gotta say, this I think was my favorite chapter out of the ones we read. I really enjoyed this stuff.
There's the shift in POV that I liked.
Yeah. So we go to Pippin, and it's kind of like he's remembering them being kidnapped by the orcs, but it's also happening at the same time. And this is the first time we see this sort of time jump, I think. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that like we've never really seen like one side of the story play out and then gone back and seen the other side of the story play out. Mm-hmm. And I think this is setting up what we're going to get in the next quote unquote book. When we get Frodo and Sam, we're going to go back and we're going to see what they've been doing since that same sort of time period. So it's actually interesting. Like I actually do this sometimes in my own writing, or I've tried to. And so it's interesting to see like Tolkien doing it back in the 50s, because it feels like it's kind of unusual thing to do, but he's doing it here.
Yeah, and that's always a fun narrative thing, because as the reader or as the viewer, you're trying to understand where it fits, and as you do, it's almost like getting references of what you just read. You'll hear someone will mention so-and-so's, I heard tell of, I don't know, a battle at Helm's Deep or something. And
this also really reminds me once again of Feast for Crows and Dance of Dragons in Martin's work. It's funny that he ended up accidentally, according to him, like not by design, but he ended up writing a book that had similar kind of things, because up until that point in the Song of Ice and Fire, it had been very like chronological, this thing follows this thing, but then that timeline got totally mixed up for those two books. Anyway, let's get back to Merry and Pippin. Basically remember how the orcs came and were when they were fighting, they weren't trying to kill them, but they were firing all their arrows at Boromir. And Boromir just like came in, slaughtered 20 of them, almost threw them back, but then they ended up overwhelming him and taking him down and essentially stealing them. We hear that the orcs that have them are arguing constantly, and some of them keep saying like, we can't kill them because of orders, and we have to follow these orders. And then the different voices are arguing because these are from two different groups, and they're arguing over like who's master to follow. Is it Saruman or Sauron? They don't say that, but like they're each following different masters. So this is sort of a side thing, but the orcs refer to the warriors that are pursuing them as the White Skins, which made me feel like a little bit like this could be potentially problematic, because the implication being that like the orcs are of color and the warriors are the White Skins. I feel like there are other people who have definitely read into this as being like, white versus non-white. I don't know. What do you want to weigh in on that at all? Like, what do you think about that?
I don't know that I've ever really seen it that way, but I definitely could understand the idea behind otherizing someone and like specifically like being something white versus something not. How does that not bring up the idea of, race relations or something like that?
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, do I think Tolkien sat down intentionally to write a story about this? No. But is it possible that some biases that he might have had bled over into his work? Absolutely.
Maybe, yeah.
And especially, I mean, he was from a very white part of England, and it probably just happened. I mean, it's one of those unfortunate things, especially when you're reading stuff from a long time ago, that like you're going to encounter. And I don't know, it's not to forgive it, but it's just to, I guess, to recognize that there was less calling out of this sort of thing around that time, I think it's safe to say. And so maybe people were just less aware of their own biases. And maybe if it had been brought up to him in a way, he could have addressed it, or maybe he would have doubled down. I don't know. I don't know the man, but it's possible that he wrote this completely without thinking about potential personal biases that might be bleeding over into his work. And definitely there's a strong sense of like white being good and white being just and everything else being impure. And that seems on itself, or on the surface at least, problematic. But beneath that, I do think there's a lot more about like light versus darkness, sun versus shadow, like stuff like that.
No, I think that there's something valid to that for sure.
And it also doesn't help that like the orcs and the goblins are sort of like brutish, sort of tribal almost, and unrefined, and so to me it feels like savage. It feels a little bit like how the Empire views the those that they are colonizing. You know what I mean? Like it feels a little bit
which would have been very much based on like English and British.
Right.
History and
right. Like I'm sure there are just reams and reams of fan fiction written from like the point of view of the orcs, and like I think there are lots of books about that, because like you would think that like they might have their own story to tell. And speaking of that, I really like some of these conversations we get between like Ugluk and Grishnak and their arguments about what their like role is here. And
that was the stuff that I loved in this chapter as well, as like that the politics of the orcs.
Yeah, because I feel like we get a lot less of that in the movie, right? I didn't think about them being two separate forces at odds with each other. Now, we definitely get some of that, but I think it was more strongly laid out here. And like the idea that Sauron could be fearful of Saruman coming into possession of the ring, and that he might oppose him as like a separate force. And that is what he's worried about, not about Gandalf later says, like he never dreamt that we would actually try and destroy the ring. He's more worried about it falling into Saruman's hands or something like that, and being used against him.
Somebody powerful, yeah. And I think that's like the history of the ring as well, is just like if it falls into a powerful person's hands, then that could be devastation. The fact that it finds its way into certain characters' hands, Bilbo. I mean, I think there are other people that the ring would have called to more powerfully if it had the opportunity, is what I'm trying to say. Because like, being in the hands of a hobbit doesn't seem like the best way for the ring to be wielded. Thinking of like Galadriel in the last book and how she refused it when she came up against it it's a huge feat. And to think like Saruman could probably be, just as powerful as her, if not stronger, if he got a hold of it, is pretty.
Well, I think
worrisome.
he'd be stronger because he's one of the most powerful people around. I think it's safe to say, and he would totally use it. Like he would have no qualms about it. Whereas I think Galadriel would like try when she would resist, but then eventually it would probably break her. He'd be like all about it. He'd be like, yeah, let's do it.
Well, he's seeking it. Yeah, he's actively seeking it. So obviously he would use it. Yeah.
So back in the camp, all of a sudden they're attacked by the Riders of Rohan, and they start killing all the orcs. Grishnak picks up the hobbits and tries to run off with them. So Grishnak's then killed by one of the riders, and the hobbits are able to basically disguise themselves under their cloaks. And they sneak off into the woods. Yeah,
so the Riders of Rohan have come upon the orcs and just decimate them. Basically, they're just killing them left and right.
Yeah, there is a cool part where I think it's Pippin is literally trying to entice Grishnak by implying that he has the ring.
Yeah,
right.
I thought this was really cool because it gives Pippin another moment of like agency, or like something that he does that's relevant within the story. Yeah, I really like that. He's like he imitates Gollum, and he's like Gollum.
Yeah,
it says something about his precious.
Yeah, because he sort of intuits that like this is what they're actually after. That's why they didn't kill us, because they clearly have orders to just bring hobbits to Saruman. So yeah, it's like the power of the ring, and like even the ring isn't in this scene. It's still like the power of it is still present. And then we see the hobbits watch as the horsemen basically run down every single orc, slaying them to every last man, and then burns their corpses. They're brutal to the orcs, man.
Yeah,
I mean, I know they're like spawn, demon type born, but they're also like sentient beings, and they don't.
Yeah, it's pretty
I don't know.
brutal.
It's brutal. Like, kill every last one of them. That's the thing Martin talks about when he was talking about his book. Like after the end of the Lord of the Rings, do we get like a mass extermination of every single living orc? Does that happen? Are we okay with that?
I don't know. Well, I think that we have to assume that last battle and like any orcs that remaining would be dead. But I think within this story, it's kill or be killed with the orcs. Like if you leave an orc alive, eventually it'll come back around and kill you somehow.
Yeah,
so
within the story,
they're so evil.
It's like you know what? Actually, another project that makes me think of Jaws. How we talked about like there's real life where like a big shark is not a monster out of hell that has to be pursued at all costs and slain. It's actually just an animal. Right. And then there's the like fiction of the world we're in, where that is the case for that book. And in this book, orcs are all bad, essentially, and they all need to be killed. There is no nuance.
And they love killing also. Like they lust for it. They want to kill anything all the time.
That's true. All right, man. Chapter 4 is called Treebeard. Pippin and Merry are in the forest, and they're once again worried about Fanghorn, when all of a sudden they hear a strange voice that says, do not be hasty, that is my motto. And we get the introduction of a large man-like tree that like goes a lot. And he's Treebeard, and I love Treebeard. He's great. He can be a little tedious at times when he's telling big long stories that take a really long time to tell, but that's kind of
the point,
who he is, right? That's his character.
Yeah, that's the point. I think that's we're supposed to understand that like with the language and his mentality, obviously he might be a little boring as a character sometimes, but I still love this character. I think that he's really cool. And I also love the kind of stoner quality that's been built up around Treebeard and Ent and all of that. That sort of like that this is like a stereotype for what someone who's a stoner could be.
We do get he hints about how he's actually extremely ancient and how he used to stride across lands that are now beneath the waves.
He basically says he's the oldest living standing thing, right?
I think that is said later by Gandalf when he's talking about Treebeard, but I think in this time we don't know that. But I think Gandalf later says he might be the oldest living being, which is interesting when you think about what Tom Bombadil.
That's what I was going to bring up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is he
like
Tom Bombadil?
How does that work? Is he older than Bombadil?
He could be.
So this sort of led me to the comparison between Treebeard and Tom Bombadil. And it made me think about how Tolkien loves this kind of character. And it's like this ancient, knows way more than our characters, like godlike character. They're like immortals, right? Like he writes the immortal elves, he writes the immortal Gandalf, he writes the immortal Tom Bombadil, he writes the pretty much immortal Treebeard, who's older than all of them. And this is something that's really hard to do, and I think Tolkien loves to do it, and I think he does it well, at least in a way that appeals to us, simple mortals who don't get to live, as long as these beings. I still believe it, right? I never feel like I don't believe that this is an ancient being. And so I think he's good at it, and he loves to do it. And it is fascinating to look at how these characters play roles in his books, right? And it's like the past embodied in a character, and he keeps having these kind of characters crop up.
The way he gets around the fact that these characters are all knowing and god beings basically is just that they're so eccentric. So like, Treebeard isn't going to tell you everything, his whole story, everything you ever want to know, because he wants you to tell him stuff as well.
Well, and also you'd probably die from old age and the amount of time it would take him to tell the first part of it.
Exactly. But like somebody like Tom Bombadil clearly has like either, I don't know what motivations he has, but he has his own skin in the game, and he's interested in what he's interested in, and everything else is irrelevant. So I think that's how you get around those characters. But it does add to, because then you can get something like in the Silmarillion, you'll hear something about like, there might be like a Treebeard reference. Like somebody comes across Treebeard or something crazy like that, and you're like, well, that makes sense because he's always been around. So why wouldn't he show up at some point?
Which makes me think, will we see Treebeard in the new Amazon series?
Maybe.
We could.
Maybe.
He's old enough.
Yeah, I guess we should talk about that a little bit, just because we have news now that last week talked about it on the podcast, that we thought it was going to be young Aragorn, because that's kind of the rumor that was going around. And now it's not going to be, which is honestly way more exciting to me.
Yeah, and I guess I am ambivalent about that. Like I was kind of intrigued about a young Aragorn story, but it wasn't like I was overly attached to that. So I'm just interested to see where they go with it, and I hope that it's going to be good.
Me too.
That's where I'm at.
Yeah.
And I hope we see Treebeard. That's my other thing.
We got to see Treebeard. He better be in every fucking episode. He better be the main character.
I don't care if we just get one cameo of Treebeard. I still just want to see him.
Yeah, he's got a real short beard. He's got like a really like nice, like neat beard.
So speaking of Treebeard, he says that he is on no side when they tell him about like what led them here, Merry and Pippin. They also don't tell him about the ring. They keep that secret. So I like that they're sort of sticking to the party line here. They know that the ring just is a super secret thing, and they shouldn't tell anyone about it. So they don't even tell Treebeard. He seems to know that they're omitting something, but he's okay with it. And he says, "I'm on no side, but except for I am against the orcs." So even Treebeard hates the orcs because they are just always chopping down trees, I guess.
Well, and that's like that goes. I know that Tolkien hates allegory, but like that's the whole allegory of like a military-industrial complex and what it does to something like the environment. And there's very much like an environmental message, I think, to these books.
Yeah, well, we talk about that a lot in our fellowship coverage. How it was adopted by sort of the hippie movement in the 70s, and Tolkien was always sort of resistant to that because he didn't feel like he had written that kind of book. And so then it gets down into like, we talked about the death of the author and like, does it matter whether or not Tolkien intended that, or does it matter what the book on its own sort of seems to mean? And I don't know, there's not one clear answer to that, but I think it is, both are valid ways to look at it. So Treebeard also talks about Saruman and how he used to be more friendly, but then he started taking up with orcs and cutting down more trees. And now there is always smoke rising from Isengard. And he says he's going to have to do something about it, and he asks them to come along. And this is a difference to me that stood out immediately. I know we try not to talk about as many differences in these book episodes, but this Treebeard is already like, I got to do something about this. Come with me. I'm going to go try and convince the other Ents about it.
Right.
Whereas it feels to me like they changed that completely in the movie to Merry and Pippin are the ones convincing him to do things.
Right.
Which gives Merry and Pippin more agency in the story, I guess. So I guess I kind of like that change.
Yeah, I was going to say that. It's anytime you can give those characters more to do, I feel like it, because otherwise it's like Merry and Pippin. I like the idea that Merry and Pippin are affecting change rather than just along for the ride. But I did want to ask you about this Entwives stuff when he starts talking about Entwives.
Yeah, he talks about the Entwives. They can't find him anymore. They lost him. Oh, well, we'll find him again in some future age, I guess is the mood.
Yeah.
Wait, what did you think about that?
This is another detail that I completely forgotten about. There's definitely some problematic things going on with like the idea of the Entwives and that male Ents, but it's also interesting that like the way that they live their lives is so slow and so passive that like something like continuing the species by being around Entwives isn't really important to them, and they become separated, and seemingly the end of the Ents is on its way if they don't eventually make more, I don't know, baby sprouts or something.
Yeah, this reminds me of like pandas and stuff. Like,
yeah,
they're just like they're dying out because they're just like not that interested in reproducing. He also takes them to his Ent house, and I couldn't quite picture this. Help me out with this. Like, what does an Ent house look like? Is it just like a group of trees? Because there does seem to be some furniture in there, like a table and a bed, even though they are said to sleep standing up. So I don't know why he has a bed if he doesn't lay in it.
Right.
Or he doesn't sleep in it, but he does like lay on it at one point, I think. It's very weird. He also, I think, looks different in the book than what we get in the movie. I think he's a little bit less like just a straight up tree, like is what we kind of get in the movie. I think he looks a lot more humanoid, I guess I'm saying. To me, I don't know. That. From the description I read, it seemed to me like he looked more man-like than Treebeard in the movie does.
Well, then I like that change as well. I think that's such a cool idea to have him like basically be a tree that is a man instead of it being the other way. Maybe a man who's similar to a tree or something like that. I
agree. I think it's a cool idea, and I could be misreading that. Other people may disagree, but that's just what I got from it. But yeah, man, can you describe an Ent house to me? Can you tell me what that looks like? Does it have walls?
It's got to be massive, right? It's got to be huge if a tree man is fitting in there.
Does it have walls, or is it just a group of trees, or like, I don't know, man. I was unclear.
My imagination of it is there's no walls, like maybe just like a canopy type thing.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know.
Clearing.
They go to another Ent house later, but let's continue on with this chapter here. So they go to the Ent Moot, which is the meeting of the Ents. And there's a bunch of different kinds of Ents there, and they're all as varied as the different types of trees. And there is a description of how like each one resembles a different tree. Like there's one that looks like a birch tree, and one that looks like a fir, and one that looks like an oak, and all this stuff. And I thought this is some really cool, like inventive shit on Tolkien's part that I think has really like carried over into fantasy in the since then. And also there's a really cool thing that I had never really thought about, and then like when I heard it, it reminded me of like maybe I had heard this in the past, but the idea that trolls are like the twisted versions of Ents, much like orcs are the twisted version of elves.
Right. He kind of made that comparison that they were as powerful, if not more powerful, than trolls.
Yeah, he says like we're as powerful as trolls. Like of trolls, we're as powerful as them, except for they're like the abomination version of us.
Right.
But I never thought about trolls and Ents having that sort of that sort of relationship and interplay, like common ancestor, I guess.
Yeah.
Or
I don't really know how. Yeah.
Like dark magic made trolls out of Ents, as in the same way that dark magic made the orcs out of the elves, right?
Right. I mean, seemingly, I don't really see the connection as much as I do with like orcs, but I guess I get that like the size and the strength. I don't know. I see more of a comparison to elves and orcs. You think of trolls and other fantasy period, you have to think of Ents, even if there aren't Ents in that story, because that's kind of the basis. Potentially,
yeah, I don't know.
Was Tolkien like the originator of a troll?
Is that true in all fantasy, or just Tolkien's fantasy? I don't know. At one point, Pippin says that they experienced a great longing to see the faces of their companions, especially Frodo and Sam and Strider. And I was like, well, fuck Gimli and Legolas then, I guess. Like,
right.
It was like weird that he like lists everybody except Gimli and Legolas.
I think it's because they were the ones like the original ones that like they set off with were Sam and Frodo and Strider or Aragorn. From Bree basically.
Yeah, no, I get it. I just thought it was funny because it was like I thought about more of the names he's omitting than the ones he was highlighting.
Yeah.
So Treebeard basically says like this is going to take a few days. You go off with this other Ent named Bregalad, and he's a younger, more hasty Ent. And we learned that he has a backstory, this hasty Ent, that he was from an area that like I guess got chopped down, and so his like wood that he was from has been destroyed. They go with Bregalad through the woods, and they go and they laugh and they sing as he's like walking them through the woods, and they have a good time. Eventually, they go to his Ent house, where he like gives them this liquid that is like sustains them. And he sings some songs about the trees that were lost. And they continue to hear the Ent Moot going on for 3 days. And then one afternoon finally comes where there's silence. They rejoin them. Or no, they're there when the Ents come marching through the woods. There's 50 of them strong with Treebeard at the lead. And he says they're going to Isengard. We're going to war. And he says it hasn't happened since the days of Sauron. Which is interesting because I didn't know that. So apparently they have marched in the past against Sauron. So this is the last march of the Ents, and as they go, they continue to like pick up more and more of them. And so this is all very different than the movie too, right? Like first off, we don't get any Bregalad or whatever, however you say his name, and once again, Merry and Pippin are the instigators, and they can't wait 3 days, and they're able to get this thing to happen sooner. And everything's just kind of sped up, right? This is another indication of things being sped up in the movie that are dragged out in the books, which we got a lot of that in the Fellowship.
Yeah.
So Chapter 5 is The White Rider. So Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas track the hobbits into Fanghorn. They head in, and they immediately come across an old man in the wood and confront him. The old man doesn't seem to know them, and he also makes them freeze in sort of like a magical way. And then he tells them that the hobbits met someone they didn't expect and bids them to sit down. Clothed all in white, Saruman, Gimli thinks, is who this is. But It isn't. It's Gandalf. It takes a while to get revealed. They have like a pretty good conversation with this hooded figure before they find out that it is Gandalf.
But you kind of get the implication that Aragorn and Legolas are realizing who this is, and maybe in some way, like the before laughing. Gimli. At one point he laughs, like Gandalf laughs, and they're like scared by it, but also kind of seems familiar, maybe. But they all draw weapons on him nearing the very end, and he like basically like. All of them shudder and let their weapons go and realize it's him at the last second. Yeah.
He does say, yes, my name was Gandalf. Indeed, but then he says, indeed, I am Saruman now, or at least as Saruman as he should have been. So yeah, this is what we were talking about earlier, where it's like they're trying to play with like the idea that maybe Gandalf is different now. He is sort of like who the white wizard is supposed to be, and not what Saruman is. And they fill him in on the death of Boromir and all the rest that's happened since. And then Gandalf tells them about how Merry and Pippin the coming to the Fanghorn has caused an avalanche to begin, which I guess is referring to the March of the Ents. And we get talk about how Sauron can't imagine that they're trying to destroy the ring, and how the two are at odds, and that Sauron fears that Saruman might get the ring and use it against him. And he also knows that the 9 are now on winged steeds called the Nazgul. And Legolas reveals that he actually shot one down in the past, but then I guess it's been replaced. And so Legolas has already killed a Nazgul, apparently.
and Gandalf was like, yeah, well, it didn't mean anything, so sorry.
He's like, he was like, good job, but it didn't kill one of the 9. He says that it was not him who was at the campfire last time, so it must have been Saruman. And I wrote down Gandalf seems to know everything. Like he just somehow is just like caught up on like everything that's going on all over the world. He knows Sauron and what he fears. He knows Saruman. I don't know. He knows a lot here.
Yeah, he knows everything definitely. And to talk about the idea that he's this different person, I think that if Tolkien had leaned into that and made Gandalf clearly a different person for the rest of the book, how much more impact would that have had? I think that would have been. I mean, granted, I love the story, how it plays out, but how interesting would that be if he's always a kind of a different person now, you know? If like he didn't feel joy the same way, or he wasn't as invested in these specific people's lives. It was more like macro. He just wanted to save everyone from Sauron coming back.
If you see more removed, and I think he is playing with that. I agree that it's like he doesn't really lean into that. It's more like kind of some of the subtext there. I will be interested to track Gandalf in the books versus Gandalf in the movie, because maybe that is a bit of the movie's effect on it too that we're getting.
Yeah, maybe.
But yeah, so he does reveal here about his fight with the Balrog, how he plunged into deep water, then went to the bottom of the water. The Balrog became a thing of slime. They fought beneath the world until he followed the Balrog from the deep places in the world back to Khazad-dûm, where they fought upon the peak. And then he defeated the Balrog finally and was saved by Gwaihir, the Prince of Eagles. Gandalf is taken to Lothlorien by Gwaihir, where he is healed and clothed in white. And so this is how Gandalf survived and was sort of reborn as Gandalf the White. And I think this is where we have to talk about the Christ allegory, because we know that Tolkien was Catholic and that he doesn't like allegory, yet you can't look at Gandalf being reborn in this way as being anything other than a Christ allegory to me. Like it's pretty naked, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, dying and going to the, well, not necessarily dying, but like going to the deepest places and fighting for such a long period of time, and then only to ascend to the highest peaks and then, you know, return to the heroes in like a different, it's there. And I think there's a lot of that, as much as, and I think that's been said a million times about the allegory that is in the stories, even though he says he doesn't like it. There's some stuff there that he very clearly, you know, whether he realized it or not, I think that he was adding a lot of specific experiences and specific messages in his books.
Yeah, I mean, and if you think about Gandalf sort of being dragged down by the Balrog, which could be symbolic for like the overreach of the dwarves and all of humanity, and, you know, by extension humanity, I guess, and then he defeats it and returns. is sort of like Christ, like dying for the sins, right? So I don't know. It's definitely there. I agree.
And it's like, I'm not 100% on this, but tell me if you think that this is what think I remember. When Jesus dies, he goes to hell, right? For a period of time and then comes back.
I don't know, man. That sounds like a comic book or something. Like, it might be true, but it sounds like he goes to hell and kicks ass. 3 days later, he returned.
I thought that he had to suffer. Like, I thought that was part of it, was that he like went to hell and suffered and dealt with all the things that you would have had to, and then was resurrected because of that.
I don't know, man. I don't think I've ever heard that. So that seems to me like maybe.
Hey, dude, that's my headcanon.
Something from that sounds like it's something out of what was that,
Dante's
Preacher
Inferno
or whatever, or something like one of
Preacher.
those shows.
Yeah, dude, that's my headcanon. You read the Bible, sometimes you get your own headcanon.
Let me just say that I apologize to whoever we've just offended, which is probably, I don't know, half of the people listening to this, but
I hope not. I don't mean it in offense. So
I mean, it could be cool. Maybe he comes back with like, a necklace made out of the ears of all the demons he slayed while he was in hell.
Well, he's got a flaming demon sword now. He's got like a crazy like.
Oh, that would have been cool if Gandalf came back with like the Balrog's whip.
That would be sweet.
You should pull it out at one point and strike the Witch King with it or something. Anyway, let's continue. So he passes on some messages to Aragorn and Legolas, and then Gimli is all sad that like he didn't get a message. He's like, "Oh, the Lady of Lorien didn't send me any message," and he's getting all depressed. And then Gandalf's like, "Oh, actually, she did send you one, and hers wasn't as sad as the other ones that she sent. She just said like." What is it? Lockbearer, wherever thou goest, my thought goes with thee, but have a care to lay thy axe to the right tree. And I was like, okay, did Gandalf just make some shit up right here?
Yeah, I think so.
You think he's lying? Because like I was like, does Gandalf lie to them? Maybe. Because this feels to me like Gandalf was like, oh man, I need to like give this guy something. He's all bummed out. I'll just tell him some shit that she might have said.
Right. Yeah, I don't know.
Like, why did you forget to say that initially? That doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, I think that's why I think that he definitely made it up. And it's for a friend's feelings. It's not like he was like, I don't know. I don't think there's any harm in what he did. A little white lie.
Maybe he's not as pure as he's saying he is.
Well, it's a pure lie. So
Gimli is encouraged by this, regardless, and they head out and they just Gandalf also tells them like that they need to go to Theoden, like that's the more important route for them, and that the hobbits are now with Treebeard essentially, and they're going to be okay. So they believe him, and they go out to go towards Theoden, and eventually they arrive at the Gap of Rohan, and they see that there is smoke rising from Isengard, and we get to chapter 6 called The King and the Golden Hall. So they've had a long ride. They arrive at the Vale. They find the Great Hall of Rohan, which is the dwelling of the King of the Mark of Rohan. They meet this pale figure named Wyrmtongue, and Theoden seems to be bent and super old and really weak. They are forced to leave their weapons outside before they came in, but Gandalf is allowed to keep his staff. There's a cool thing where Aragorn's like, you're not going to make me put down my sword. This is, what's the name of it? Enduril or whatever?
Enduril, yeah.
Yeah, he's like, you're not going to leave. And then finally he agrees. He puts it down. And he's like, no one's going to touch it. It's going to be right here when I get back. It's not going to have moved an inch. And the guy's like, okay, geez.
Somebody, as soon as he left the room too, somebody was like, touch. Somebody like put a finger on a touch.
Yeah. And I like how Gimli's like, well, I guess my axe can go here if it's going to be in such good company. And he sets it down by the sword.
If you're a guard and a wizard shows up at your lord's place and he doesn't want weapons and you let him have his staff, you're a moron. Like, I don't know how else you do.
Well, but I mean, it's good though, because like maybe I don't know, maybe that guard was onto some like Wyrmtongue is garbage and needs to be called out or something. I don't know, because it ends up being like that's how I don't know how much of his power is derived from his staff or not, but Gandalf is able to
definitely uses it. Yeah,
we're getting to here. Did you notice that both Wyrmtongue and Theoden call him Gandalf Stormcrow? Yeah,
I did notice that actually.
Like, what is that referring to? Or is that just like calling him a like piece of shit or something, and just that's like a polite way of saying it? I don't know.
Yeah, I really don't know what that is in reference to, but I went ahead and looked it up, and it's apparently it implies that Gandalf is both the harbinger of doom and a scavenger who benefits from the conflicts between neighbors.
So he's calling him a piece of shit,
Yeah.
like carrion bird who's coming in and capitalizing off of this. Yeah. So it's not referencing something specific, but it sounds like it is. He's like Gandalf Stormcrow.
Right.
Anyway, Gandalf raises his staff and tells Wyrmtongue, fuck off, blasts him, and immediately Theoden starts getting more strength. Also, we see this is the first time where Eowyn and Aragorn meet, and we get that Aragorn immediately finds her fair, and they have a moment.
She can't. Yeah, he realizes that she can't stop looking at him. They're can't. They keep catching each other's gaze.
Yeah. Hey, man.
Hot stuff.
It's lonely out there, I guess. So Gandalf brings Theoden out into the light to see his land again, and when he does, Theoden is able to stand tall, cast aside his stick, and look like just way younger than he had looked before. Theoden has no sword, but when he is given one by Éomer, it seems like he kind of rises to his full power then when he holds the sword again. Éomer, who had been cast out and has now been brought back, right?
And I think that's one of the biggest things for them, was because it was clearly just like the manipulation of Theoden had him removed, and he's like clearly an important person to the.
Yeah, because Wyrmtongue has been insinuating himself into the situation and getting Theoden to do things that go in Saruman's favor, whereas Éomer was wanting to, go against that and actually fight the orcs and do the right thing, and he got cast out because of that and was sort of on a shit list. But we also learned that Éomer is actually basically the closest living thing Theoden has to an heir at this point, because his sons have all died.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I don't know.
Is he the heir, or just because I thought his daughter?
Well, he names them heir later. Before they go to Helm's Deep, he says, Éomer is now my heir.
But it wasn't up to that point, I would assume, right? Because he had to name him that.
I don't know who the heir was, because I get a sense this is a very patriarchal society, so I don't know that Eowyn is necessarily in line here. But who was? I don't know. It seems like they would have had to say that somebody was, but I don't know. So Wyrmtongue is basically called out, and Theoden commands him to rise as he's whining and sniveling, and he says, "You're going to come with us, and you're going to fight, and you're going to demonstrate your worth as we fight the orcs." Wyrmtongue does not want to do this. He seems terrified. He has an alternate plan of, how about you name me steward while you're gone, and I'll rule here in your stead. Theoden does not like that. Gandalf calls out Wyrmtongue, says that Saruman is your true master, and he convinces Theoden, instead of killing him, to give him a horse and see where he goes, essentially. Does he come with us and fight, or does he go fleeing to his master? And Wyrmtongue spits at the feet of Theoden, goes to get the horse, and fucks off, I guess, to go.
I'm really surprised
Saruman.
First off, the fact that they let him get a horse and go away, I understand that they were trying to see where he was going to go, but they should at least if I'm him also at the same time, I'm definitely going to act like I'm on their side and then dip out later, right? You don't have to make this.
This is not a very Game of Thrones moment, that's for sure.
Yeah.
He just gets to leave. It seems weird. I did there was a detail right after this where a guard goes and takes his helm down to a well, fills it up with water, comes back up to the steps where he spat, and washes it away. I don't know. I just thought that was cool. His respect for the place, right?
And that's the big thing, is it's very clearly the spitting was a huge moment, and that's why he didn't leave under the cover of night or something after he acted like he was on their side. It's because it's all about, it's about the statement of it. It's about spitting at the feet of him and showing him he thinks he's on the right side, is what I'm trying to say. I think Wyrmtongue thinks that he'll retreat back to Saruman, and eventually he'll get what's coming to him. Theoden will get what's coming to him. In
defense of the way it goes down, I think it does highlight Theoden as being more honorable and forgiving and merciful and not evil, right? This shows him being...
Wasn't it Gandalf who tells him to let him go? So it's
kind
of just he's just doing what Gandalf does. He doesn't
have to listen to Gandalf here. You know what I mean? He could say, fuck it, no, I'm going to kill him. He listens to Gandalf. So maybe Theoden through Gandalf. But it makes us like Theoden and not think of him as some kind of merciless killer.
Right.
Which maybe if he had just chopped off Wyrmtongue's head, like maybe we would have felt that way. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
So Gandalf lays out the whole story of like how he thinks Wyrmtongue was being used to in the long game by Saruman to weaken Theoden and weaken Rohan. So in return for being sort of lifted from this hold that Wyrmtongue has on him, Theoden gives Gandalf Shadowfax, which he then laughs because like Shadowfax runs up like he already is Gandalf's, but Theoden's like, I'm making it official. You know, he's yours. He says you can have anything save my sword, and Gandalf names Shadowfax. He offers anything that's in the armory to the rest, and they all go down and like get some sweet new loot, which made me laugh because it reminds me of like D&D, which is obviously sprung out of Lord of the Rings. The idea of like magic items and just getting better armor, getting better gear, and how there is like a certain joy to that. Like it's just kind of fun.
Definitely.
Gimli is already wearing like a short corset that was forged beneath the mountain to the north, so he doesn't replace that, but he does get a helmet and a shield. All this stuff, you know.
And I like that what he says about it's emblazoned with a horse, and like he would rather be emblazoned with a horse than ride one.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and we get Eowyn who's like smiling at Aragorn, and again they have like another moment, and that's all that there is. It's interesting because like it felt to me like there's not a lot done here to establish a budding romance. It's just like looks and like a smile and like Aragorn noticing she's hot, and that's it.
I think that's enough in this story though, right? I think in terms of what he was trying to convey, clearly you know that these two characters are attracted to each other, and that's all that he's trying to get across right now. Yeah.
So Theoden basically says they're going to go forth and to Helm's Deep, right? Éomer's going to be his heir, and Eowyn he's leaving behind to be the leader. And so this is like kind of like a big moment because he's like, who shall lead while we're away? And they end up naming Eowyn, which is suggested by one of his like one of his advisors, I think. It seems like, and he goes along with it. It's not his idea though. Like I kind of wished it was Theoden's idea, I guess, or maybe Éomer's idea. I don't know. Somebody more important than just like a random counselor.
Yeah, this is what why I thought it was weird that I guess naming an heir for just for safety.
Yeah, because he's like,
it
is
an important moment, but
battle.
but in case he dies, he names an heir. But it's also interesting that like he names Eowyn leader when he could have just potentially named her leader and heir.
Yeah, but he doesn't. He names Éomer heir.
Right.
Yeah, that's the patriarchy for you, man. And then we end on the note of everybody behold the White Rider. That's like what we have going for us on our side is we have the White Rider and they don't. And the last host of Rohan rides forth, leaving Eowyn alone behind on the steps of the Great Hall. And that's like the final image of this chapter. And it's interesting here because it's like we're getting the last march of the Ents, and we're getting the last host of Rohan riding forth. So both of it's like two big armies, I guess, marshaling to war. And we know that the next chapter is called Helm's Deep. So I think some shit's going to start going down. And I'm excited to get into that.
Here at the end, I felt like Gandalf was like really full of himself. Like real full. Like I couldn't help but feel that way. He's like, I mean, I get it because he's all knowing and all that, but he's like telling, at one point he's like, you can have anything, Theoden's like, you can have anything you want. And Gandalf is like, I want your best, I want the horse that I've already trained and it's mine, basically, to be officially mine. And I don't know, a lot of that stuff happens there at the end, and they're like, behold the White Rider. And I'm like, all right, guys, we get it. Gandalf's awesome.
I mean, he's Jesus, so yeah.
Right.
I mean, clearly, we all gotta worship. I think is the implication here.
Yep. I'm definitely Googling that as soon as we get off this recording. I'm gonna Google does Jesus go to hell?
Okay, we're gonna have to fill our listeners in next week on what you find with regards to that. Does Jesus go to hell and do battle with demons and?
I don't know if he does battle with demons, but
I don't think so, man. I'm pretty sure.
If I made this up, it's blasphemy. But anyway,
well, I guess this is where we're gonna leave it until next week. That was a lot of fun, and it's a lot of stage setting, but that's all out of the way now. We're ready to get into some action, I hope.
Right.
So yeah, come back next week when we're gonna cover the next third of this novel.
Yeah, I had a great time with all this setup, and I really enjoyed it. I think, like I said, I liked easing back into it. I'm so excited for next week.
Yeah, and I'm eager for the fights, but I'm also really eager to get back to Frodo and Sam. Honestly, I'm really looking forward to that, which I know we'll get a little bit of that next week too. So we really wanted to thank Grant J, who has been a patron of ours, like from, I don't know, not at the beginning, but like for a long time. And he's been a big supporter of ours for a while, and we really appreciate his support. And if you wanted to find out how to become a patron yourself and what sort of bonus content we're offering to our patrons, go to patreon.com/ink2film, and you can see all of that.
Yeah, thanks again, Grant. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at @ink2film. And join our Facebook group, the Council of Inklings.
And leave us a rating and review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. We officially, I think, for this weekend, crossed 56 reviews, ratings, rather. And I read somewhere that if you get 200 ratings on iTunes, you can apply to become a critic on Rotten Tomatoes. You can become like an official person who says whether or not a movie is rotten. Which would be cool. I don't know, as a podcaster that you can get that. So that's our new goal, is to get to 200 ratings, which is it's a lofty goal, I know, but like that'd be cool if we could ever hit that one day. So help us out. Leave us a rating and review on iTunes if you can.
Thank you to Jennifer Delazana for providing our transcripts, and thank you to Music Archive for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, man. Until next time.
Thanks for listening.